To everyone who has taken the time to join us tonight. We have a group of panelists here from the Noseband pilot project that was conducted, the first phase of in-competition measurements over the summer. Four stewards who participated in the project have been nice enough to sit here with us tonight and have a panel discussion about some of the learnings and how we can move forward. I'm just going to do a brief introduction about the pilot project. So we have embarked on understanding how we can make alignment across the disciplines with noseband tightness rules within the Equestrian Canada sanctioned competition space, as well as how we can support stewards in assessing that noseband tightness compliance. With the project at this phase, we did use the ISES taper gauge to conduct the measurements on the ground. We had over 550 measurements all across the country in all different disciplines at all levels, with 20 volunteer stewards who participated in the pilot project. They had worked with organizing committees and different groups to be able to conduct measurements throughout the competition, have discussions with competitors, as well as complete the different data points that we had put together for them to contribute back to Equestrian Canada from that process. Moving forward, we're going to be working with some students through the University of Guelph to compile all the data gathered within the in-competition phase, as well as circulating some surveys out to the stewards who participated in the pilot, all of Equestrian Canada stewards, as well as all of EC sport license holders, to get further feedback on where we stand with noseband tightness and how we move ahead together with education, training, and potential amendments to the rules to create alignment and a safe work space for our equine partners in Equestrian Canada sport. So we will have lots to come out once we have a final report from the process so far, including what our recommended next steps will be. I think we have some obvious ones already, which include better education around bridle fit and selection and noseband fit, but we're really looking forward to the consolidation of everything that's been collected so far and using this opportunity to let you hear it straight from the stewards who participated about how they felt the first phase went. So with that, I'll pass it over to the chair of the EC Health and Welfare Committee, Bettina Bobson, who's going to introduce our facilitator for the night.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for your interest in this super important issue for both horse welfare and for social license in working with horses. I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Rolly Owers as our panelist tonight and our moderator. Dr. Owers has a huge long resume, and he's just given us a two-liner, and that is that he's a qualified veterinary surgeon and has been the chief executive at the World Horse Welfare since 2008. Rolly is passionate about the horse-human partnership and the importance and relevance of social license for equestrian sport. So with that, I'll turn it over to Rolly, and I'm super interested to hear what people have to share tonight.
Bettina and Christy, thank you very much. And thank you very much for the invitation to take part in this evening's webinar, which is so important. You know, how can we apply science to improve noseband tightness in Canadian equestrian sport? This is my second association with Equestrian Canada this year. Actually, I met your president out at the FEI General Assembly last week, which is a great pleasure and honour. And I also gave a talk earlier in the summer about social licence. And it's a concept that I am really sort of passionate about, as Bettina said, because I think social license will help us secure equestrian sport going forward. And social license is all about sort of that unwritten contract we have with society today, and society is changing all the time, especially its views about animals. And we can see that when we think about circuses and zoos, but also within equestrian sport too. And the way we can protect our sport is by behaving with trust, transparency, and building confidence with the public. And how we can do that in part is by having rules and regulations for our sport which are built on evidence. And obviously that evidence in a large part comes from the science. Science is slightly tricky though, because it doesn't always give us a black and white answer, a simple answer. It can be quite a complicated answer. And any of you are involved in the world of research, that any conclusions from research, generally one of them is to carry out more research. But you've also got a base, as we said, rules on, as best we can, that common sense, but building it on the science. So I'm delighted to be joined. You can probably tell I'm not a Canadian, although I've had many lovely visits to your country, but I'm delighted to be joined this evening by four very, very experienced riders, stewards, coaches who've been involved in the pilot project. So firstly, Susan Legg, who is a senior Equestrian Canada general steward and judge, who also enjoys jumping her amateur jumper. Alan Ehrlich, who is a senior Equestrian Canada general steward and a former member of the Canadian Olympic team and a lifetime horseman. Diane Goyette, who is a general Equestrian Canada and R2 steward and also a basic dressage steward, who's active member of the Equestrian Canada driving committee. And finally, Brett Filson, who has a lifetime of experience, both as a steward, a rider, a trainer, a riding coach, and over 30 years as a steward, including being a senior dressage steward and a general R2 steward. So that is our panel, and our topic and our theme is how can we apply science to improve noseband tightness in equestrian sport. And we're going to divide the session into three before the closing remarks. We're going to have some opening comments, very brief opening comments for each of our panelists. Then we're going to go through a series of questions that have been submitted to us, partly through social media, but also through other means as well. And then we will finish up with some closing comments from the panelists before I hand back to Christy and Bettina. And we should all be done. I don't know, I think it's 7:10 with you. It's a lot later with me, but we will all be done by 8:10. So within the hour we'll be done. So I'm going to turn first to Susan and to ask Susan what your initial thoughts are on how we can apply science to improve noseband tightness in a Canadian equestrian sport.
Okay, so thank you. So for me, the application of scientific criteria to our interactions with horses makes me feel that as a sport body, we're looking at these relationships with a higher level of integrity than ever before. I think that Equestrian Canada's support of this study is demonstrating a commitment to improving horse welfare by developing a system of consistent measurement that can be applied easily and accurately at competitions. Nosebands can be such a useful training tool, or they can be a source of discomfort and damage to the horse. So the more we know about noseband fit and its impact on anatomy, the better we can do for our horses. Being aware of the impact of items like nosebands creates responsible riders and handlers. So for me, the ISES gauge is so useful because it demonstrates consistency in measurement, which results in trust of the tool and the process. With trust in the fairness of the system comes cooperation. So the ultimate result is not just compliance with a rule, but the desire to do better by our horses. And to me, this is positive science in action.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Susan. God, there's a number of things you said there: integrity, simplicity, noseband fit. And I love the idea of actually being more than just being compliant with the rule, actually getting people to understand, actually it's not about doing the minimum, it's doing the maximum. I thought you just raised some really interesting points there. Thank you. Diane.
Yes, actually, I was kind of curious when I was involved in this test. I was wondering if it was going to work and be accepted by people. And when I started using it, I thought it was very nice because you could explain to all of the riders that it's the same rule that applies to everybody. So you measure it, and everybody was kind of curious to find out, how do you measure it with that tool, and why that tool, and why do you do it on the nose instead of doing it on the jaw? And it was kind of more of an educational exercise. And at the end, I did it for many shows, and it was the people coming to me and asking, can you measure this horse? And it was kind of fun because it meant that the people were also looking for something that is comparable from one competitor to another one. And they're all everybody that I've met are interested in the health of their horses. So when we were explaining what a tight noseband can do to a horse, they reacted immediately. And if they had to loosen it up, they would loosen it up. There was no question asked, because they understood why we were doing it, and they were very interested for this to go on.
Brilliant. Thank you, Dan. And the term consistency there, I think, is really important, isn't it? And I'm sure we will come back to that. Brett, what are your initial thoughts?
Well, having been a steward for a good number of years and having had a rule, Equine Canada, about noseband tightness for a good number of years, and the whole concept of 2 fingers under the noseband. I remember at one seminar I attended that, how do we know what 2 fingers is? My 2 fingers may be much larger or much smaller than someone else's 2 fingers. Where we measure has been inconsistent between the FEI and Equine Canada. And now with our measurement tool, the new measurement tool that we used this summer as a trial, we have a standard. Every horse and every rider can see what the standard is because we have a tool. And that means that application of the rules is consistent. We don't have to worry, is this horse getting away because we've measured on the cheek instead of on the nose? It's provided great clarity for riders and great clarity and positivity in terms of the steward. You can say, this tool is the measurement tool that we use for 2 fingers. It's very simple. The riders accept it much more willingly, for the most part. And those, you will know exactly which horse people are the ones we have the biggest challenge with. But the vast majority of our competitors accept that. Now we have a tool, we say that noseband is too tight and I can prove it to you. Then the competitors are much more willing to accept that they need to make an adjustment. And that's brilliant in my mind.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. We've got to change people's behaviour, and to change their behaviour, they need to understand. So I think the clarity, and that sort of overlaps obviously with what Susan said about the simplicity, and you talked there, Brett, about the importance of having the clarity, and that what really helps people understand to make the changes. Thank you. Alan, what initial thoughts from you?
Well, everybody has covered it, I think, really well, but anybody who knows me knows that I'm very much about the integrity of the sport, and I think that's one of the steward's jobs, is to maintain the integrity of the sport. The youngest person who had an animal that I tested was 8, and the oldest person was 81. And the interesting connection there is that they both were willing to learn, why are we doing this, what is it about, and whatever. The young person, the 8-year-old, the noseband looked tight, was tight. I explained to him and his mother was his trainer, what the ramifications of it were, tried to tell, the horse, they had no idea that the horse's teeth go almost halfway up to their eyes. And, but the long and short of it was they loosened the noseband 2 holes. They had bought this bridle, put it on the pony, and that's the hole it had always been. They loosened it 2 holes, went in the ring, and won an under saddle with 23 ponies. They came out of the ring and they said, just thank you so much. And this is an 8-year-old. I think our job is to educate horse welfare for sure, not top of the podium, but science is about learning and learning is about teaching. And, Susan has been a teacher most of her life. She can identify with this, with this easily. But I think that once we started, and I mean, I stewarded 68 days this year, and so I saw a lot of horses and a lot of horse shows on a lot of days. And the last 2 horse shows that I did, literally, I had people coming to me and lining up saying, you have your tool, can you measure my noseband? Can you do this? And they wanted to be seen by the other people that they were competing with, that they were being checked. And the word spread. I think it was quite popular. I think it was quite well handled. I definitely think the tool worked. Is the tool perfect? I don't know. I have no idea what perfect is, but the fact of the matter is it worked. I absolutely, by the time I had done the 4th or 5th horse, the very first horse show, to what Brett said, I've got small hands and small fingers. Somebody else would have larger hands and larger fingers. Somebody else would have fragile fingers, whatever. The fingers were not going to be the answer because it was going to be different. The tool, whether it's this tool or another tool that we develop or is developed for us, is going to be the telltale. But the fact of the matter is this tool worked. And, you know, I did a couple of 100 horses. My tool doesn't have a scratch in it. So there was no resistance. And the truth of the matter is, I don't know how many I tested. You know, they've got that on record. But the fact of the matter is, not one person that I approached said no.
That's fascinating.
Like not one. And the fact is that we had a number of American competitors at some of the shows that I did. I mean, you're under EC rules. I went up and asked them, and these were some high profile trainers. Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Yeah.
And the ones that were a little bit tight, I did not have one turn it down when I said, could you please loosen that? You know, the best part about it, and I think the most rewarding part about it, was the fact that the general group needed to be educated on why we were doing it, what it meant, what it was, the physicality of the horse, and the welfare of the entire situation. And I think it was very well received.
Brilliant. Thank you, Alan. Yes, you've made some really. I love that. Science is about learning, and learning is about teaching. I thought that was a great little saying. So let's move into the questions then. And if I might, I'm just going to come back to Susan. You talked about noseband fit, and I may be speaking from a British perspective here, but there's a lot of there is a lot of awareness around. Well, no, there's not a lot. There's more awareness around the importance of saddle fit, and we all understand that the importance of saddle fit. But actually, there seems to be less awareness about bridle fit, and then obviously the individual parts of the bridle. Do you think there is a deficit, or there's a lack of education, awareness, understanding around the importance of bridle fit and what the individual parts of the bridle are there to do?
I absolutely agree with that. I'd like to go back to, touchstone on what Alan said with the young person, that people buy tack, and sometimes not everyone has the Pony Club experience that many of us had as children to learn how to fit a bridle correctly. And sometimes trainers do it and sometimes they don't. One of the recommendations that I put forward for another question was perhaps somewhere Equestrian Canada could create a document or something that could be released to show people, here's what a noseband of this type looks like if it's fitted correctly. Here is what this looks like if it's fitted correctly. Because some people are using some of these devices and really don't seem sure how they should be fitted correctly.
Diane, how important is the noseband? And obviously there are a lot of different types of noseband. And to ask a rather controversial question, how much is fashion and how much really does go to good riding?
There's, yes, definitely a lot of kind of noseband, and it looks like some people like to create new bridle type every year. So the people in the show don't necessarily know each part of the bridle, what it does. And I agree with Susan, there should be more education or educational material available for these people to know more about it, and to know why it's so important. Because in driving, noseband is a must. In other discipline, might or might not. So you got to follow the rules of the competition. But if you don't adjust the noseband correctly, your horse may have bad reaction. And actually, in some of the shows, when I asked the rider after measuring, do you mind loosening it up? Or do you think you're going to have problem with your horse? Well, the people are tense in a competition. So they always think if I tighten it, my horse will listen more. And when they did it, they loosened it up. They went for a second dressage test or hunter exercise. And when they came back, I asked them, did you see a difference? And they said, oh, my horse reacted much better. He was not tense. Well, obviously, if the horse cannot breathe, he's tense. And the rider is already tense because he's competing. So it multiplies factors for which security is more at risk. So the more people are comfortable, the more they're confident, the more education there is, not only for the riders, but for the coach and for instructors and for everybody that is involved in adjusting saddle equipment, the better you are from a security point of view and for the health of the animal.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Diane. Brett, if I can come to you, the question is, what did you learn about competitor noseband tightness decisions, and also their willingness to change? And you picked up on the point, the fact that the majority were willing to change, and some potentially maybe a bit more resistant to change. So, in terms of what do you learn about the competitors and their understanding of noseband tightness, but also about their willingness to change?
The amateur competitors were the best from my perspective. Although in the hunter world, they were extremely good already. I found very few tight nosebands in the hunter jumper world. Not that I did a lot of hunter jumper shows. I do predominantly dressage shows anymore. I just the way things are. I find the amateurs were very willing to listen when I said that we're using this measurement tool. Understand if the horse gets upset, I'm not going to do anything. If there's any time at any risk, we're going to ensure the rider is safe before we do anything. It was very important, the learning process of getting them to understand, as much as I've stewarded for a long time, and I've been around horses all my life, some horses react. I didn't have one that reacted to the noseband measurement tool. The horses were all fine. I found advanced dressage riders, those who are riding Pre-St. George and up, were the ones that felt their nosebands should be tighter and, quite honestly, heavily padded so they could tighten them even harder with crank nosebands. Those were the ones that were most difficult to get them to understand that what they were doing is no longer going to be allowed. There's a reason we don't want this to happen. There's damage that gets done. The horses are not as comfortable. And I mean, I've ridden everything from Western pleasure horses to eventing horses. When my horse is comfortable, they compete really effectively. When my horse is uncomfortable, it's usually something that I've done. And having a tight noseband isn't going to make it better. Having a tight hold on the reins isn't going to make things better. Having my legs clamped around the horse isn't going to make things better. Those are all those parts that we need to help riders and coaches and trainers understand so that they can improve. That this noseband measuring tool, I think, will provide this, or whatever tool it is, as Alan has said, will give people a better understanding of what is an effective measurement on the noseband, and the education will become extremely easy. From Stuart's perspective, I know all of us get phone calls all the way through the year. What about, is this bit allowed? Can we use this bridle? Can I use bronze colored stirrups in a dressage show at a gold show? Can I carry a 1.20 m whip or a 1.40 m whip with a pony? Because you see all of those things at horse shows, whether it's at Angel Stone or the backyard dressage show.
So do you think, Brett, just following up on that, I mean, obviously everyone's talked very nicely about the importance of education, but also the role of rules. Do you think and you know, for those at the top end of the sport, are rules more important than education, or is education still as important at all levels?
It's a loaded question, really.
It is.
I think the FEI riders know full well what they're doing. I also believe that FEI stewards have a tendency to measure nosebands on the side of the nose, where you can slide 2 fingers in that side of a noseband. If it's heavily padded and extremely tight, you can slide 2 fingers in, because the padding gets it away from the side of the horse's mouth or the side of the horse's nose. I couldn't slip a pin under some of the nosebands on the FEI riders. And I told them this was unacceptable. Now, we weren't out there to be doing discipline. This was not a summer to create a disciplinary procedure, but it was certainly one for us to give some education. And when we get around to it and start applying clearly that this tight noseband is not acceptable, we're going to see a big change.
Yeah.
And so is it education? Partly. It's mostly stubbornness.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Brett. That was a loaded question, I freely admit. Alan, can I just before, compared to when you were at the Olympics, how is the situation with noseband tightness evolved? Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? Is it just different?
I think it mostly has stayed the same. There's new and varied nosebands, especially when you get into the jumpers. But for me, again, it's all about education. It's all about, you know, we're in a copycat society, and it doesn't matter what line of life you're in. And you see something that works for somebody, well, you're going to try it because you want it to work for you. And it doesn't matter whether you're talking clothing, horse equipment, cars, whatever. And they'll see somebody with a tight noseband and they say, yeah, I'm going to try that. And it was very educational for me, because I found the wider the noseband, and I'm talking wider this way, the looser it seemed to be. The more padded the noseband, they seem to be tighter. And I'm generalizing here, not all of them, but I'm generalizing, just, you know, from a visual point of view. And I think that there needs to be, you know, going back to what Susan had said earlier, an educating process whereby this is how you fit a noseband. This is how the brow band should fit. This is why you use this type of reins, because the tack shops will sell you anything, and they have everything to sell you. And again, you know, everybody wants to be fashion conscious, and they saw somebody win with this type of noseband, they've got to go get it. And it's the same with bits and whatever. I think there needs to be education about how they should fit, what the purpose of each type of noseband is, and where do you want to go with this. And, you know, not every horse is going to be the same. Not every horse is going to react the same. And certainly not every rider is the same.
Yeah.
But you know, when, you know, to what Brett said, when you get to the upper echelon of the riders, and it doesn't matter what discipline they're in, they didn't get there by not knowing the rules. Whether they break the rules or not is another story, but they didn't get there by not knowing the rules. And, you know, when they break the rules, it's never the first time. But I think that in general, I think one of the things that I would love to see happen from this project, and as the project goes on, is word get around that the nosebands are going to be checked, and there will be ramifications if in fact they're illegal or something is wrong. And people will go out and find, okay, what do I do? Which noseband is best? Again, I relate back to that 8-year-old child who was like we were in school. He did everything but put his hand up to ask questions. It was brilliant, and his mother really appreciated it. And I walked away from it. I was just glowing because, you know, I felt that I had helped him, but he had wanted to be helped. And I think a majority of people out there when you take the right attitude with them, will want to be helped. I mean, my goodness, you'd like to think that the huge majority are in this because they love horses. This is what they do. It's one of the few, over the last 2 years of COVID, it's one of the few participation sports that's been allowed to continue. And so we are so very, very fortunate. But I think that we've started, you know, in the period of time that we've done this project, I think we've started to educate a large, large group of people. And I think it's been a success. Is it done? No, not even remotely. By the same token, I think there's been a number of people educated. The fact that people would come up to us and say, have you got your tool? Can you measure my nose? Can you check my noseband? Can you do this? Can you do that? I even had a couple of people say to me, okay, and I'd have it in on the nose and they'd say, okay, let me see the difference when you put your 2 fingers in there. And I found that pretty interesting. Now, these were people who were very experienced, okay? Some of the most successful in the group. And it was very interesting that they would say, oh, let me see the difference between the tool and your fingers. And I found it interesting because, you know, as Brett alluded to, not everybody's fingers are the same width, length, or flexibility or whatever. And I just think that, you know, it's one of these experiences that we went through this year where everybody learned, and hopefully the whole group, you know, we're putting a dent in some nasty stuff, and we've set a precedent to go forward in a positive way.
Thanks, Alan. And it looks like we lost Rolly for a minute, so I think that's just a technology gap. I'll just kind of take over for him until he rejoins us. Susan, I wanted to go back to you and ask you a question about, so based on your experience throughout the pilot project, and knowing who EC is and the amount of different groups that we work with and that we're trying to find consistency and alignment, what advice would you give us moving ahead with a standardized measurement and a standardized measurement tool for noseband tightness? Okay,
so first, I think we have to have the tool, number one. Number two, I think that, you know, we have to, again, go back to what Alan was saying, which is the standardized tool takes away the perception that someone's being picked on or targeted, that something isn't random, or that measurement, in fact, is random. We need to have that. I also think that once we decide how this tool is going to look, EC should create a tool, adopt it, and then maybe even be able to sell it. Because, you know, it should be part of every groom's kit, you know, especially the big guys out there, right? Like, that should be in there. They should all know how to use it. The horses, especially at the higher levels, if they are used to this thing being used all the time, I mean, for us, for FEI stewards, it's going to make everybody's life a lot easier if it kind of becomes sort of the same sort of thing as, you know, boot check or any sort of other randomized, I mean, you know, check that we have. I'm primarily in the hunter jumper world, so we don't have as many checks at the national level, but anytime you can make horses familiar with things, and grooms and riders and parents familiar with things, the better we'll all be.
Thanks, Diane. And it looks like Rolly has rejoined us, so I'll give him a second to get his bearings and then pass it back over to him. I like your points about, you know, the randomized and looking at having our own tool. And just to build off that, if Diane, if you could tell us maybe one thing you liked about the tool that was used within the pilot, and one thing that you ideally would consider changing if EC were to look at how to make this more functional. We know stewards have a lot on their plate during competition setting and want to try to keep those realities in mind. So if you just had a suggestion on what was good and what was not, I'd like to hear from you guys on that.
Well, actually, what was good was that it was accepted by the people. Even the horses that were very, very tense after the competition, we would give them a few minutes to calm down and use the tool, and the horse would still accept the tool. It's mostly the riders that was not confident that it was going to work. So what I liked about the tool was that I was never having to explain my 2 fingers are bigger than another or smaller than another. And the people kind of accepted that reality that they never thought about. And they said, okay, oh, that's good. What I didn't like, or what we would have to work on, is try to see how this tool can be used in combination with the flash noseband. Because sometimes the tool goes on there, but the flash brings it so tight that it defeats the purpose. So maybe, as we were mentioning before, looking at the bridle equipment or the saddle equipment would help combining the effect of all this. That would be the thing that I would see improving over time. But as far as the tool itself, I thought it was very handsome, easy to use, accepted by the horse, accepted by the riders. And we even had the product to clean it in between each horses to make sure that there would not be any viruses spreading because of us using the tool. So that was great.
Thanks, Diane. And maybe I'll throw this question to both Brett and Alan, just based on your backgrounds and the levels that you both deal with. We've had, significant feedback that alignment with the FEI on our rules is important. I'll allow you both to just respond of where you see that work needs to be done, or how we should move ahead with that sense. We know from Equestrian Canada, we've identified that working with the FEI on this is important, but kind of just what your initial thoughts are with that statement.
I'll be really quick. I was actually at an FEI dressage stewards clinic in Florida 3 years ago, where we talked about having the need for a measurement tool and having a standardized methodology for measuring nosebands. I think at that time, Elizabeth was considering that a tool needed to be decided upon and used effectively so that we could have consistency. So I think there are people in the FEI world that understand we need to do something. I think Canada has done a great job of coming up with a really safe tool. I don't know about other stewards, but me sticking my fingers under the noseband of a horse and having them go up on me was never a really exciting thing. The tool, if a horse did react, I wasn't going to be injured in the process, and the horse wasn't going to be injured in the process, and the rider wasn't going to be injured in the process. The safety of this sort of thing is very important, and I think that's really critical with our FEI, especially dressage riders, that they start to understand a standardized measurement like this and a standardized way of measuring is critical.
Thank you, Alan. Is there anything you wanted to add in on that one?
I think one of the things I liked about the tool was it was solid. You weren't gonna have to, oh my goodness, I dropped it, it's gonna break, it's gonna whatever. I wasn't happy with the color green, but I'm being facetious there. But I think it was handy, it was easy, put it in your pocket, put it in your golf cart, put it somewhere, you had it, it worked, and it was identifiable for the people. I think, and I'm hoping that this type of measurement becomes standard throughout the year, whether bronze right up to the FEI stuff, and that the education keeps going, because the rules are a framework. I've always tried to, in all the years and stewarding that I've done, is to inspire confidence in the competitors, trainers, observers, whomever, that when you make a judgment or you make a statement or you do something, you're going the right direction because it's within the rules, and you're trying to do not so much them a favor, you're trying to keep them in line with proper management and etiquette, and it is, at the end of the day, there's no question it's about the welfare of the horse. And I've always used the adage that if you make it better for the riders, hopefully they will make it better for the horses. And sometimes that works and sometimes you're disappointed. But I think this project has so many positive avenues that come from it, and sets, I think, a very, very good direction for the future.
Thanks, Alan. And Bettina, I know you wanted to just add in on the double bridle conversation before. Oh, Susan, did you have something to add as well?
Yeah, I'd just like to bring up something that actually was said in one of our previous calls about this whole process, and because it wasn't my suggestion, but I thought it was brilliant, that if we are going to create another tool, we should streamline this thing a little bit more, because there are a couple of other things that the tool has on it that I don't think we really need. And then someone was talking about the groove, that if you had like really sweaty horses, it was hard to get that clean. There it is. There's the tool. Thanks, Alan. And so I really like 90% of it, but if it could be streamlined that little bit more, because you want to make it as easy to clean as possible, because that's the only other thing that ultimately, I love the big thing of wipes you gave us, but we got to figure out a better way of carrying wipes, because just a little inconvenient. But you know what? On the whole, I mean, that was just something I thought that was brought up was quite brilliant. Just keep it as simple as possible.
Perfect, thank you. And
Christy, I'm sorry, I'm back. I don't know what happened there. It's a long way to the UK.
Welcome.
I'm glad you're back. I managed to hang on to it until you came back. I know Bettina just had feedback, and then it's all yours again, Roly.
I just wanted to circle back to Brett's comment about the FEI horses and the double bridles and the horse's anatomy. And as a veterinarian that does a lot of dentistry, a lot of sport horse dentistry, I know myself as a rider that has ridden in a double bridle. I am very meticulous about the dental work for horses carrying double bridles. Why? It's simple mathematics. There is just that much more metal in that mouth, and you've got a curved chain, and you have a class 1 lever. So having that dental arcade as smooth as possible, because one of the things about a double bridle, particularly with a big padded noseband, there is very little room for escape. If you have a horse in a mullen mouth or any kind of a modern snaffle, if you're riding with too much hand on one side or the other, and the noseband's not tight, the horse finds a way to escape that pressure, or at least lessens that pressure. But to me, it seems kind of diabolical that, we've got the people with the simplest tack at the lowest levels that are riding with the least amount of contact, and they are the ones that are embracing the welfare, and their concern about the welfare, and the animals that are the highest trained at the greatest risk because of what we're asking them to do with respect to tack. And of course, there is not a double bridle in existence, unless it's 25 years old, that does not have a crank fastener, which I'd also like to briefly mention. I couldn't agree with you more. And when it comes down to the FEI and riding at the highest levels, okay, and riding internationally, if you want to talk about who animal rights activists, people who are going to challenge our social license, they're far more likely to be at a gold show or at an international level show than they're going to be at the local show with the 8-year-old who's happy to loosen his noseband. Like, these are our highest profile people that we need to reach about the importance of this. And just briefly going to mention that darn crank noseband. The crank noseband, and I see a lot of too tight bridles just at lameness exams, and you almost have to put your hand in there so you can buckle that, because it's the crank noseband is inherently designed to be made tight. That's how you get that buckle to close. So there is some education there for sure. But I really appreciate your comments, and I think if we want to look bigger picture, I'm looking at leading the FEI on this one.
So thank you, Bettina. And sorry, Christy, I think we've covered off the ISES gauge, and because I came on with Susan with some minor modifications. So I think for all of you, and I'm going to just ask each of the panelists a yes/no answer, and then we'll expand it. Do you have ongoing concerns that nosebands are too tight in equestrianism generally, or in the specific area that you're involved in? So Brett, are you concerned that nosebands are too tight in your area?
I am concerned that nosebands have been too tight in dressage for years. not across the board, but at the most senior level, the most advanced coaches, the most advanced riders, the nosebands are too tight. I have been at horse shows when I did predominantly Saskatchewan for years. I had competitors whose nosebands were so tight, they'd come out of the ring and I said, if you don't loosen that noseband, you're not going back in the ring.
Yeah.
End of story.
Okay.
It's been a problem for a long time. And I'm thrilled that we're doing something about it. So, yes.
Good. Thank you. Susan?
Modified, no. At the hunter gold shows and bronze shows that I did primarily this year, and in my experience, hunters, not a problem. Some jumpers, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Alan?
I would say, in general, no, but there are some uneducated ones. There are some that are educated that, again, feel they're going to have more control, but I don't think it's a major cruelty issue at this point in time. And I think we need to keep on it. We need to keep educating. And I would include in the education program people who run tack shops.
Yeah.
You know, they're the ones that are selling the equipment to the people that are using them. But we need to, we need buy-in from the trainers. The trainers will get buy-in from the owners. But I think the way we did it this summer, at least my experience, was buy-in from all the trainers. It was very enlightening, very, very good, very positive.
Brilliant. Thank you, Alan. And Diane, what about you?
I think general awareness wasn't there. Were everybody having tight noseband? No. And the younger they are, the looser the noseband was, generally speaking. But when you raise the awareness, the people were much better as far as putting a noseband in a much fitting condition. Yeah. So I think I cannot really say a yes or a no. I would say the first time it's a possibility that it was too tight, but after awareness, it was less and less people having tight noseband.
And I'll come back to Adrian. Are there specific types of noseband that you think that really concern you more than others?
Well, like I was mentioning before, the noseband that they put a flash with, these one were always a problem because sometimes they were adjusted one portion of the nose and too tight on the other portion of the nose. The crank noseband require attention because it's very easy to put it too tight.
Yeah.
For the other noseband, I didn't see any. Well, I was more in the bronze show, so they don't have all the fancy bridle that they have at a higher show. But I didn't see that much concern.
So, Brett, at your fancy gold shows, what are there specific nosebands that concern you?
The ones that concerned me the most and were most consistently held too tight were the padded, heavily padded nosebands.
Yeah.
Every time I saw one of those, it was the, oh God, here's another one I'm going to have trouble with. And it was consistent. The heavily padded nosebands, the riders are able to tighten the noseband with that crank so tight. The horse can't move their jaw at all. I mean, I understand the whole concept that Bettina brought up of you get that double bridle in there, and if the rider doesn't want that bit to move around too much, a bit moves around too much when your hands aren't quiet enough. It's pretty easy to understand it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, it's those heavily padded ones kill me.
So, Alan, on that, do you think there should be rules around crank nosebands or around heavily padded nosebands?
I'm not so much in the heavily padded nosebands, although the more padded they are, you wonder, is there something hiding in there? And I did actually have a situation this summer with a very, very high profile, very wonderful trainer who, you know, rides 1 million horses, and a horse was brought to him, and he went to get on. I said, "Do you mind if I check this one?" "No, that one's good, fine." And there was something in there, and he was horrified because this is a horse that's just brought to him, doesn't stable with him or anything. And I mean, the long and short of it is he fired the client and the horse went home. But it's easier to hide something in the padded ones. And the padded ones, very definitely, to what Brett alluded to, seem to be tighter. By the same token, I found a ton of padded nosebands that maybe looked tighter than they were. And when I measured them, they came off just fine, because, you know, the padding and some of them made them twice as thick as a normal noseband would be.
Yeah.
And, you know, they can tell you it's for fit. They can tell you it's for this. They can tell you it's for that. The fact of the matter is, a tight noseband's a tight noseband. It doesn't matter whether it's padded or not.
Yeah.
And I would think that you know, it's fashionable. The padded ones look pretty, I guess. I don't know. I didn't find a huge number of them that irritated me that were too tight. A couple, and they loosened them.
Yeah.
And you know, it's again, it's a lot of it's educating out there how to fit these things, what the purpose of them is, what the physicality of the horse's head is. Part of what we're doing is trying to educate them.
Yeah, brilliant. So, and for Susan, for you, is padding a real sort of flag of warning that this may be a problem?
I don't tend to see a huge amount of padding because, again, I'm in the hunter jumper world. When we actually I had to ask, and so did a few other stewards, for some clarification when we first started doing the survey about what was meant by extra padding. And it turned out that it was sort of the stuff that was put underneath more dressage type nosebands. So I don't see padding in a lot of ways. What I found that was interesting to me was bridles like the Micklem that had sort of have a slightly different design of noseband, and pardon me for using brand names. And then there's a Dion double noseband. I thought those would be problematic, and they weren't. I measured a ton of those, and I thought, you know, those are going to be tight, and they weren't. What was overall my big issue were flash nosebands.
Okay.
Flash nosebands were the problem.
Okay, so that's your flag. Brilliant. Well, listen, I don't know where the time goes. We need to start wrapping up. So it doesn't help that I went for a coffee break in force earlier. So I'm going to come to each of you now just for your closing comments. And I think, you know, if you can, as we mentioned before, if you can focus those around not only what we've discussed tonight, but what you picked up during the pilot project as well, and maybe especially what you think Equestrian Canada should be doing next, that would be great. So I'm going to come to each of you in turn. Alan, I'll start with you.
Is that because I'm the oldest?
Not at all. I just go in reverse order to the way
I did come over with Columbus. I think that it was tremendously educating, both for us and the owners, trainers, riders, handlers. My advice to Equestrian Canada would be to continue this project, refine it, whatever. I think that it shouldn't be a sort of, you know, once in a lifetime thing. And I think it should be part and parcel to everything we do. I would love to see that tool out there, as was alluded to before, for sale, and every barn should have one. So there will be no surprise when they go to get measured. You know, I mean, I had a couple of horses that I had to be a little bit careful with and whatever, you could tell. I mean, you know, in my experience, I know how to do that, but I think it was tremendously successful. I think it sent absolutely the right message. And right now, I think the word is out there. And I think it needs to go across the country with buy-in right across the country, because at the end of the day, it's a positive project that gets a positive resolve. And it doesn't matter whether you're talking horse, pony, whatever discipline they're in, it applies to them all. And I just think it was I looked at it as a privilege to be part of it, because, you're going a positive direction, and you're educating people who need the education, and you're building confidence in people who know they're doing it right. And yeah, can you measure my horse? Well, sure.
Yeah.
Measure my nose. Yeah. No,
Brilliant.
I thought it very positive.
Excellent. Thank you, Alan. That's grand. Brett, what are your final thoughts?
I love the way Alan covered all that. It's I've admired the man for a long time, so I'll quit patting him on the back pretty soon someday. I think we, as Alan said, we need to continue to move forward on this project. The education that we started this summer, not just with competitors and coaches, but with stewards, was helpful. Is the tool perfect? Nothing is perfect. When I go to measure a pony, sometimes the ground isn't 100% level. Sometimes you have to be a little different. With the noseband tool, if we have a consistent noseband tool, we're going to get consistent results, we're going to get consistent education, and we're going to get positive change. That's all I want to see.
Yeah.
And if we have to get to the point of consequences, let's make sure the consequences are very real and enforceable.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you for that. Diane, what are your final thoughts?
I thought it was very well handled. I think Christy and her team did good communication around it. Good selection of people across Canada to try on. And I really like the experience. What I like moving forward is for EC to continue market this tool and the need for this tool to be applied consistently, scientifically, explain the scientific aspect of it, but also as we're moving on with the noseband, expand with the rest of the bridle. And that could come as a phase 2, perhaps. We have to finish phase 1 with the noseband, but I would really love to start thinking about the next move being the bridle adjustment.
Brilliant. So you're talking about actually not just changing the noseband, but thinking about the rest of the bridle, including the bit, I assume.
Yeah, the bit, the flash, every other equipment that the tack shop or designer are creating to as a fashion or in trying to improve the horse control or whatever, but without necessarily thinking on the health and the head conformation of the horse.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. Thank you, Diane. And Susan, I know going last, everyone else has nicked everything you were to say, but I'm sure you've got other thoughts as well.
Well, I do. So I just think this project is the beginning of something great for horses. And just to talk about the science a little bit, I mean, I'm not an expert, but once I became part of the data collection process, I got really curious and started doing more reading about overly tight nosebands and discovered all these peer-reviewed research papers and just some of the stuff that we need to know. Like, according to researchers, tight nosebands can act in the same way that a tourniquet does when you apply it to someone's arm. And then it doesn't really matter if the noseband is thin or wide, pressure is still exerted at a rate which can be extreme, which is terrifying. And additionally, another study demonstrated that horses with tight nosebands had an increased heart rate and increased eye temperature, and both of these are stressors. And then last, it seems that a significant percentage of horses who regularly wear any sort of noseband can show detrimental changes to the nasal bone or jawbone on X-ray. So if we start thinking about these considerations, I mean, we live in a world where ethical treatment of the horses that we use, it's paramount. And so we have to use this as our opportunity to learn to do more and do better.
Brilliant. Susan, actually, thank you, because that really links it back really well to the theme, because it is about the science of it and really trying to, and as we talked earlier, I think it was Alan who said it, the science leads to the learning, which in itself leads to the teaching. And so that is really, really important. Listen, it's dead on 8 o'clock. And just in terms of a few closing comments from me, I thought that was a fascinating discussion. And I think what has shone through from it is how positive everyone is about what Equestrian Canada are doing. And there is certainly a real request that I'm hearing for it to continue. And this is the beginning of a journey and certainly not the end of a one. So I think that has come across loud and clear. The second thing that's come across loud and clear is education and the importance of education. And what's fascinating, actually, we've started to unpick, actually, that's at different levels. Of course, the rider is central to that, but it's also about the trainer and the coach. And also we talked about tack shops as well. So we want to think about the different stakeholders and the different people involved in that, and how we can actually take that education out and get people to start to understand. I think there is real value in the third point is around consistency, and it sends a very strong message. The fact that, you know, if you know that your bridle, if you know that your noseband might be checked, subconsciously that makes us change as people, so you are more likely to have, in my view, to not ratchet it up one more hole on the noseband if you think you're going to get checked. So I think, even subconsciously it's going to have an impact, but I think it obviously is really important at all levels, but especially at the elite levels, to have a consistent approach. We can't have an inconsistent approach, and obviously that was a real challenge of the 2-finger rule, as has been clearly said. People's where people do it in terms of measure it, and the thickness of their fingers really does vary. And I think in terms of that advice, I love the idea of, actually, I think it was Susan who suggested, Equestrian Canada doing some guidance and some webinars possibly on the different types of nosebands, what they might be used for and how they should be fitted correctly. And then, as Susan says, Diane, I think said, build that out and actually include it in the whole bridle. Obviously, the one thing we didn't talk a lot about was around rules. And I think what was quite encouraging is the fact that everyone recognized that actually this is a challenge that is going to be largely met through education. Yes, I think it was Brett who said you need to have consequences for people who don't comply. But hopefully, in the large part, we can move through education, through greater awareness, and really link, actually, as many of you have said, actually, it improves performance. And this is a great opportunity to say better equine welfare improves performance, so and if you can make that link in this area like in so many others, then it's really, really powerful. So listen, thank you. Those are a few closing comments. I'm not sure, I think I'm handing back to Bettina, but thank you certainly to Susan, to Brett, to Alan and Diane. I'm sorry I haven't met you personally, but it's been great fun meeting you remotely, and I just want to thank you for being such excellent panelists and bringing such a rich discussion to what has been a bit of a sprint around a really important topic. So Bettina, or Christy, over to you.
I'll let Bettina go ahead and then I'll wrap us up.
Thank you, Rolly. Thank you so much for moderating the panel. You just have such a depth of experience in sort of teasing out the information. Thank you very much to our stewards for all your work on the ground, your ambassadorship, and the time that you've spent on these calls. For those of us that are sort of sitting back and trying to make this happen, it's absolutely critical that you share your in the trenches view. And it sounds like it's been overall positive, overwhelmingly positive, and also taking us slightly in a new direction. And I'm very much a carrot versus a stick person. That fits in with modern training, doesn't it? So this might just be the beginning of something bigger and better for equine welfare and the horse and human partnership. And I also want to give a shout out to Christy, who has so many balls in the air all the time. She has been a dog on a bone on this project. And Christy, I just so appreciate that you continue to drive it forward. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Bettina. Thanks, Rolly, and thank you guys. Bettina captured it very well. I'm very happy that you put your names forward for the panel. When I called out to everyone to ask them to come forward, and I think that your perspective has been, very helpful for how we need to move ahead. So we have some great recommendations coming out, a lot to consider, and developing the path forward is going to be, crucial for making sure that we continue to make a positive change on the ground. So thank you for your support. And and your constructive feedback and your positivity throughout this process. Rolly, you just do such a great job at this, and you, like Bettina said, you know how to pull it together so nicely and keep the flow going, even though you have to step out for coffee here and there. But I'm very grateful for what is probably 1 a.m. your time now, and your contributions to this, and look forward to working with you on things in the future.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. It's
Thanks
great
so
to
much.
see you.
Have a great night, everyone. And the recording will be made available, and any feedback from people who attended can be sent to me, which is klaroche@equestrian.ca. Have a great night.